Hey guys, Taylor Swift is inarguably one of the biggest stars in all of music right now, especially with a certain relationship being made public and the newest Taylor's version release of 1989. As a country fan, I find I much prefer her earlier records when she still defined herself as a country artist, but that being said, while a lot of her music does have a much greater pop appeal, she's always maintained great songwriting throughout her entire career. So in honor of her wildly popular Eras tour, I'm going to highlight a country fan's favorite song from every Taylor Swift album. The first few albums are difficult because of how many good options there are. Nearly the entire list is well-written classics, made even more impressive by how many were solo rights. Our Song and Picture to Burn are classics in their own right, and Say Beautiful fits the name well. But based largely on nostalgia and specific imagery, my pick for her self-titled debut is Teardrops on My Guitar.
Here's a reason for the teardrops on my guitar.
The tragedy of being friend-zoned by the boy she loves is so raw and real, you can really feel the layers of emotion: frustration, sadness, anger, regret, adoration. It doesn't quite have the same crazy ex-girlfriend feel of the Speak Now era. It's just a simple, tragic love song longing for a boy who doesn't feel the same. There are a lot of good options on Fearless, and for honorable mentions, You Belong With Me and 15 are two of my favorite Taylor Swift songs of all time. But my pick for Fearless has to be Love Story. Admittedly, it's one of her more popular songs, but if anything, I would call this song underrated. The idea of a modern-day love story mirroring Romeo and Juliet is a beautiful metaphor for the timeless nature of love, which fittingly she explores in her song Timeless. But we'll get back to Speak Now. Love Story paints a beautiful picture of love prevailing where it was doomed to fail. The imagery is top-notch, and the switch up in the third chorus is enough to make you cry, scream, or just sing along every time. I have a really hard time not picking the title track from Speak Now. The play on the formality of weddings makes for a super interesting song and a great metaphor for Taylor's transition into pop music, but the song that really holds the spot in my heart is Mean.
Someday I'll be living in a big old city.
I find Mean is the perfect balance between being incredibly well written, but still clearly the voice of a girl in Taylor's position. Taylor wrote and released Speak Now when she was just 20 years old, and Mean just feels like a 20-year-old's honest response to malicious criticism. There's something incredibly powerful about choosing to act juvenile and vulnerable, but then backing it up with some of the best solo writing in the industry. Although it was technically released as a country record, Red is the first big swing into pop music for a lot of Taylor songs, like 22. That being said, while I love the songwriting of most of the songs, especially the title track, I can't, in good faith, take anything other than All Too Well.
They say all's well, it ends well, but I'm in a new hell.
It says a lot about the song that when Taylor's version of Red was released, she released a 10-minute long version of All Too Well, which immediately became the standout song of the new record. Deep down, the song is just about looking back on a past relationship and realizing that some memories stick with you, whether you want them to or not. But the real beauty of the song is in the wordplay and the delivery. For all the hate Taylor got earlier in her career for her voice, her delivery on the original All Too Well is fantastic, and the re-recorded version is even better. The lyrics flow like a paintbrush across a canvas in a progression that feels almost more like a saga than a song. "1989 is tricky because, as the first official pop record, there are a lot of really big swings taken. And while Wildest Dreams is a huge guilty pleasure of mine, it's very repetitive and doesn't really say all that much. How You Get the Girl has some great lines, but my pick for 1989 has to be Clean, the last song of the original record. I hadn't heard Clean before working on this video, but it stuck out on the record in a way I wasn't expecting. To start, it's much slower than the rest of the record and almost a minute longer. I'm not a huge fan of the deep synthy sound, but it does make it stand out against the rest. But what really caught my attention was the lyrics. I love the metaphorical resonance of the rain representing her tears, washing away the pain and the memories from the relationship. There are also undertones of addiction and sobriety, both in a literal sense with the drugs and alcohol that are a running theme in 1989, but also implying an addiction to the other person. I'm hoping Taylor's version of Clean becomes a bigger hit than the original, because I think it's a message we can all use sometimes. Side note on 1989 specifically, a lot of Taylor's albums have deluxe editions with extra content, which is all definitely worth a listen, but the original 1989 deluxe edition has some really cool voice memos about the songwriting process, which are definitely worth a listen if you're interested in a peek behind the scenes. Reputation is generally where Taylor's music becomes too pop and produced for my taste, but my Reputation pick Getaway Car feels like a solid rock in that storm.
You were driving the getaway car, we were flying.
The sound is still a little bit too synthesized for my taste, but it makes up for it with super intriguing songwriting. I'm a sucker for a good turn of phrase, and the refrain that "you found me running away from something, you shouldn't be surprised when I run from you" is just beautiful to me. Admittedly, the obvious choice for the record would have been New Year's Day, as it's by far the countryest song in the album.
I'll be cleaning up bottles with you on New Year's Day.
But as much as the simplicity of just the piano and her vocals is super refreshing, it doesn't really feel like part of the album, so Getaway Car gets the edge on my list. To me, Lover seems like a much more neutral problem. It's not trying to be country by any means, but it also doesn't have the aggressively synthesized production that Reputation did, so I find Lover at least tolerable and in some cases really good. Paper Rings and London Boy are my guilty pleasures, and the messaging of "you need to calm down" was almost enough to get the spot on my list, but I'm going with The Man.
I'm so sick of running as fast as I can.
The Man is all about highlighting the struggles of being anyone other than a cis white man in a male-dominated industry, which on its own feels like it could run the risk of feeling like complaining and making excuses, but the song is carefully written to explore how much easier it would be in a world where she was a man, rather than directly complaining about how difficult it is not to be one. This works incredibly well to diffuse the anger of the lyrics, but also serves to mock male artists who sing about abusing their money and power. It's also worth mentioning that the music video goes incredibly well with the theming of the song, and is definitely worth a watch. As Taylor's first surprise quarantine album, Folklore is much more country and folk inspired than her previous releases, which gives me a lot more songs I enjoy to choose from. My first instinct was to choose Exile, her collaboration with the folk band Bon Iver, as the lead singer Justin's voice sounds incredible in the song. The problem is, I feel like his voice completely overshadows Taylor's, and while I think they both play their own parts well, they just don't quite mesh together. So instead, I'm going to cheat a little bit and pick Betty, the third song in the teenage love triangle of Folklore.
If I just showed up at your party, would you have me? Would you want me?
The first song, Cardigan, is actually from Betty's perspective, as she looks back on the relationship years later, saying deep down she knew how it would end, but the feeling of being held in the moment was worth the pain down the road. The next song, August, is from the other girl, who's unnamed, as she reflects on her affair with Betty's boyfriend, James. She laments how, in the moment, she would have dropped everything for him, but in the end, he was never really hers. And finally, Betty is James' apology to Betty, saying he made a mistake and asking if she would take him back. All three are good, and they're especially good together, but my pick for the album is Betty because the upbeat harmonica is just amazing. And I want to mention the amazing wordplay between the songs, specifically the refrain of Cardigan and Betty, "When you are young, they assume you know nothing," and "I'm only 17, I don't know anything." To be honest, I'm not sure why I don't love Evermore. Both Folklore and Evermore are big shifts back towards folk and country music, but for some reason Evermore specifically just doesn't do it for me. I think Taylor's ability to add a hooky, radio-friendly flair to otherwise great songwriting is something I've always enjoyed about her music, but Evermore's hooks just don't stick with me. The one exception to this being by far the biggest hit of the album, Willow.
The more that you say, the less I know. Wherever you stray, I find.
Normally, I find the joy in songwriting in saying a lot in very few words, or in building a net that paints a very clear picture of what the song is talking about. Willow is almost too poetic for me to analyze. At its core, it's about Taylor longing for a man and the effect he has on her. But the way she danced around the subject is just that, a dance. The metaphors and wordplay twist and twirl in a captivating, hypnotic pattern. This whole channel is about analyzing songs, so it frustrates me to say that this song is just entrancing beyond words or reason, which I think might be the point. After the pandemic albums, Midnight is back towards the pop sound expected from Taylor. As much as I had hoped for Taylor's full return to country, Midnight is still much less in-your-face than Reputation, so I actually like a lot of the album. While I love the honesty and sincerity behind You're On Your Own Kid, I don't love it sonically. So instead, I was planning to go with Antihero, because it's the full package. It's an aggressively honest peek behind the curtains of her own life and insecurities that's well written and sounds great too. That being said, picking the fan favorite from all of her recent albums isn't very interesting, so instead, I'm going to go with my number 2 song, Mastermind.
What if I told you none of it was accidental in the first night that you saw me?
Mastermind is a song about a romance where Taylor's admitting to being much more in control than she leads on. I don't know what it is, but there's something sort of fascinating to me about the borderline sociopathic lover stereotype, mixed with the sort of girl boss theme that's a huge guilty pleasure of mine. Plus, any song that can unironically include words like Machiavellian deserves some recognition in my book. I feel bad for picking some of the most popular songs for the last few albums, so I'm going to throw in my favorite From the Vault tracks at the end here. Fearless has my least favorite from the Vaults, but my favorite is That's When, her collaboration with Keith Urban.
That's when you were waiting at the front gate. That's
tend to shy away from Taylor's collaborations because I feel like one artist always ends up overshadowing the other, but I think Taylor and Keith's voice play really well together. As much as I would love to choose the covers of Babe or Better Man from Red, my nostalgic love for the originals hurts my taste for her version. So instead, I'm going with Message in a Bottle. It feels very reminiscent of the Red era, with a very 2010s pop sound, but I enjoy it anyway. From Speak Now, I've already mentioned Timeless.
I would have read your love letters every single night.
As a standalone song, Castles Crumbling might actually edge it out, but the way Timeless is tied to Love Story gives it a huge boost in my book. Admittedly, Love Story illustrates the concept much better, but as a From the Vaults track looking back, the extra perspective on the classic song works really well. And finally, 1989 feels different from the others to me. I feel like 1989 is really where Taylor found her voice and her sound, so going back to the others feels like a huge shift. But that vocal development, mixed with a more prominent production, means Taylor's version of 1989 doesn't actually sound all that different, which, on top of the From the Vaults tracks being mostly mediocre, leaves me surprisingly disappointed with her most recent release. That being said, the one song that caught my attention was Is It Over Now?
Did you think I didn't see there were flashing lights? At least I had the decency to keep my nights out of sight.
It's a fascinating song about a doubly unfaithful relationship, which fits really well with the other themes of 1989. What do you think? What are your favorite tracks, and which era was your favorite? I'm super curious to hear it down in the comments. Thank you for watching.